2, 1. Zach.
Pat.
What's up, buddy?
How you been, brother?
I'm doing very well. Nate.
Hello.
May I call you Nate, or is it Nathan?
You can call me Nate, yeah.
Nate. All right. It's good to have you on the show. It's good to have both of you guys back. It's good to be on episode 2, y'all.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got the first one out of the way, got the intros done. We can get to the meat and potatoes, if you will.
Fantastic. So what you been up to, Zach?
Oh, geez. Well, let's see. We've had some weather up here, been sick a little bit, but went to some classes this week. Let's see here. Oh, I got tattoos.
You went and got more tattoos?
Yeah, I got 2 more. And,
2 more in 1 week?
Yeah, well, you know, my wife and her friend went and they booked like way too much time, and the guy was like, well, I'm free for like the next few hours. And I was like, well, I got a couple ideas, and so I just sat down and got some tattoos.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. I saw that. She got the infinity thing with the feather in it and stuff.
Yeah, it's the most basic tattoo ever.
Hey, I've seen a lot of your tattoos. I don't think you can pick on anybody else's.
Yeah, no, mine looked like they were drawn in crayon.
I've been talking to the wife about getting some new stuff done. I would like to get our logo tattooed on my arm. I just want to make sure the podcast is successful before I do that.
Well, I got the logo tattooed on my hand about 8 years ago.
That was the inspiration. That was the inspiration.
Yep. There it is. Yep.
So Nathan, Nate,
Sir.
Zach, don't call me sir. I work for a living. That's the joke, right?
Yeah.
So Nathan, Zach was very in high regard of you to bring you on the show today, and we look forward to talking to you and hear your story. If I may embarrass Zach a little bit, he said, this is what he said about you. He suffers every single day, yet he takes in negativity and radiates positivity. He is amazing in selflessness, genuinely mentally tough. What do you think about that?
I think he's very generous in his description of me. I do appreciate it. But no, he as much as he says about me, I mean, he's also a block for me in my life that I can always stand on. You know what I mean? It's always good to have someone. So he's always a word of encouragement. So
awesome. And I understand y'all have a special relationship. What is that?
Yeah, it's, usually when I tell people, I'm like, listen, this is going to get fast in a hurry. Just the way we grew up and how, you know what I mean? Everybody says blood's thicker than water, but in this case, it's one of those things where, it might as well be blood.
Uh-huh.
Just the way we grew up, you know what I mean? Like our parents got together when we were 5. They were together on and off for like 14, 15, 16 years, something like that. That's a real thick situation too. But I mean, just the way we grew up together, the same age, we're 2 months, 2 days apart. So, I mean, we're brothers. It is what it is. You know what I mean? We were at the same stages in life growing up, and we always had each other, and we stuck with that. So
that's awesome. He was telling me about you, and I said, well, give me some talking points. Give me some bullets so I know so I don't look like an idiot talking to this guy. And he goes, well, you want to know a special fact about him? I was like, well, yeah, I need to know anything about him. And he goes, he's my brother. So I said, all right, well, fantastic. Episode 2, we're bringing the family members in. Awesome.
Yeah. I was kind of elated when he was like, hey, you want to come over for episode 2? And I'm like, episode 2? Like, you guys are starting your voyage and you're already cutting me in. That's great. I'd be honored. You know what I mean? So thank you for that, by the way.
Fantastic. And you sound a little bit more northern than Zach. How do we explain that?
I think it's the first time I've ever heard that. So when you say, like, is it the way like I pronounce my wording and stuff?
Yeah, your accent. Sound a little bit more northern. I was sitting around listening to the episode 1 this week, and I was like, why does Zach sound so southern? I mean, I know he was down here in Virginia Beach for a while, but is that something you picked up in the woods?
No, you marry a woman from Alabama, and then that'll change you. But if you want me to talk like I'm from Lewis County, I mean, I could really kind of talk about it. I could get on the old skidoo and take her for a rip bud, but I just want to really ask you how she's going, and maybe we'll head over to Montague, get some wings on wing night.
That sounds nice. I like wings. So Nathan, obviously we brought you on here for a reason, and we want to hear your story. And Zach was telling me that you have, some significant things to say, some significant adversities that you've run to in life, some trials that you've overcome, and maybe some stuff that you're going through now that might help some other people. So, what's your story, bud?
Well, just like Zach, I'm from Watertown. I tell everybody I was raised in Watertown because when I wasn't out home with my mom in Lewis County, Southern Lewis County to be more specific, I was in Watertown all the time between the time with my dad and stuff. And then, when my old man and Zach's mom got together, I was there as much as I could be. So there's that. We grew up. He went in the Navy, which was the best thing for him, and I went to college the first time, and it wasn't. I don't think my focus was in the right place the first go around. I had a couple hiccups, and a couple self-conflicted issues. Got myself into some trouble, So I ended up moving back to Watertown. Met a girl. We have 3 kids. The rest is written in the sand. But now I work for a construction company. I'm going back to school. I finish up in December, so I'm looking forward to that. But along the way, I came across an arrhythmia in my heart that was taking a real toll on me, and they had to do they call it a non-invasive procedure. It's a catheter ablation. They went in up through my groin. They burrowed a hole through the center of my heart and created scar tissue around my pulmonary veins where it comes into my left atrium to block the electrical signal that was creating my heart to not beat normally. Mm-hmm. So I think that was January 20th, 2015 that I had my procedure for that. And I'm cured of Afib. I had atrial fibrillation. I don't know if I said that. I apologize. And,
no, you said you had an arrhythmia, and from what I understand, you were 23?
Yes, sir.
When you found out you had Afib. Now,
yes, sir.
As a medic, I know that Afib is kind of natural for older people. As a matter of fact, I've always heard the words that if we live long enough, all of us will get Afib. And atrial fibrillation is essentially the atrium is just kind of is not having a seizure. And when that happens, the rest of the electrical pulses are not getting to where they need to go so that the heart operates the way that it should. How did they find that?
I found it because my resting heart rate would just go absurdly high. Like, I never actually recorded what it was without medication, but I was on anti-arrhythmia medicine until my procedure when they diagnosed it in August, the August before. And they found it because I went in complaining about high resting heart rate. And then when I was on medicine, they started monitoring it, and it'd go up to 172 on medication.
You said 172?
Yeah.
Holy moly.
Yeah, and that was on the anti-arrhythmia medicine. My cardiologist says it was probably right around 200 or in the low 2s if I wasn't on medication. So
we're talking about like a supraventricular tachycardia at that point.
Right.
Very uncomfortable. And just to give the people at home who don't, wear heart rate monitors and things like that, I get on a salt bike and I do sprints on that, and I'm pushing to get, past the 140. So if you're just sitting there and you're 172 over 200, that's got to be very uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you say supraventricular tach, because that's initially what I was diagnosed with. So I went in for my first ablation in December, the December before the January, about a month before, and they went in for supraventricular tach. When they gave me the medicine to induce the arrhythmia, they found that it was actually atrial fibrillation, so they had to come in with a whole different procedure. It's
probably hard to find because your heart's beating so fast that they can't see. And I'm by no means a doctor, but I am 10 years a medic. Your heart is actually beating so fast that it's hard to find how it's not. So with Afib typically is irregular, an irregular heartbeat. So if it's beating so fast, it's trying to, you're really getting to the minutia of trying to find out where it's irregular. So I can see that totally.
Absolutely. And, so, ever since that second ablation, though, I'm completely cured of Afib. So, Good. I couldn't be more than happy that now I have constant PVCs now.
Okay.
Which is the lesser of two evils.
Okay.
I'll take those in a day, but I mean, just overall, I think with my experience, there's just a constant anxiety looming over me. You know what I mean? Anything that's involved with your heart, I mean, that's your main pump. You know what I mean? So it kind of affects everything that I do, and I really have to fight myself to stay out of my head unsupervised, because I'll get real lost sometimes up there, just constantly worrying about, you know, like life expectancy. How long I'm going to make it, what my quality of life's actually going to be, stuff like that. So I really kind of have to force myself to stay out of there sometimes. And sometimes it does get away from me. I'll fire up my Google machine and I'll start looking on WebMD, and next thing you know, I'm done in a week, because they're right about everything.
That's a black hole you don't want to travel down. That's a blocked website in my house.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how many times I've had strep throat and died from AIDS.
It's a vicious circle.
That's right. So when you say that you've had to maybe alter your lifestyle, would you say you've had to alter your lifestyle, and can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So I used to be I used to drink a lot. I did. I was at a ripe age, but at the same time, I think I took it a little harder than other people did around me. Most everybody I knew, I should say. But I haven't had a drink in 53 months.
Very nice.
So, like, I'm completely sober. I don't do any caffeine. I haven't done caffeine in the same amount of time. No nicotine in that amount of time. So, I mean, just with what I take in my body, and you know, it's like foreign substances and stuff like that, I keep it pretty generic. Now I stick with high fatty foods, loaded carbohydrates, stuff like that, you know, just to stay chubby, because it's my only vice. But no, that's another battle. But no, that's really, honestly, I just cut everything out. I don't drink. I lead a life of sobriety now. You know, so I try to involve myself with keeping on that path, and it's pretty simple now. Now it's just a routine. But from my understanding, what I talked to my doctors, once I had that procedure, and given that your left atrium's got the thinnest chamber wall in your heart, he's like, you just become ultra sensitive to stimulants and alcohol and stuff like that. And he's like, your best chance of keeping this away for the rest of your life is going to be, if you take the precautions, don't drink, you know, try to stay away from stimulants, stuff like that. So, I mean, that's one thing that I've changed.
So no coffee,
for sure. No coffee. Drink herbal tea.
And you're still alive.
Decaffeinated herbal tea. I'm still alive.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Zach, how does that work?
Yeah, this is the only guy I've ever seen that can jump out of bed at 6 a.m. every day and be chipper with no coffee. He's just ready. He's up, ready to be there, happy to be alive. And I roll out of bed and I'm like, if you talk to me before my first cup, one of us won't survive this.
Yeah, I'm ready to come up there and be trained in that that voodoo. So people say I have a little bit of blood in my coffee. That's what they'd say about me. That's what Zach says anyway.
Oh, yeah. I don't even dare drink coffee at your house unless I know there's a defibrillator around.
Now, to be honest with you, you know, back, I'd say about 7 or 8 years ago, I was hitting the energy drinks pretty hard. And I started drinking those before I started drinking coffee. And I remember there was one time where I was hitting, say, 3-4 monsters a day, you know, taking years off the end of my life. And I remember sitting at work and thinking, I'm going to die right now. And it was as if a robot just lost its charge, and we were sitting around eating lunch, and I just went like that. And the guy sitting next to me goes, "Pat, are you okay?" I said, "I think you need to put me on the monitor." So I think my heart rate was only like 155 resting at that. So I couldn't imagine sitting there at 200. Now, did they say what caused that for you, Nate?
No, and that's the weird thing is they say since AFib's not immediately life-threatening, that it's considered what they do with AFib's considered preventative. It's not really saving your actual physical life in the time. And they say since it's not immediately life-threatening, there's no research that goes into it, not much funding and stuff, because there's a preventative route on it. So the doctor said usually it's genetic, but other than that, it's just one of those things that they don't really have a initial cause for.
Right.
So,
people live with AFib for a long time. It's just very uncommon for somebody to discover that at 23 years old.
Yeah. I got a lot of adverse reaction about that from like just going into my CT scans and stuff like that, you know, like talking to the nurses that are prepping you. And they're like, oh, hey, so what are you here for? And I'm like, oh, I have AFib. And they're like, you're like 32 years too young for AFib. And I'm like, I keep getting that from everybody. Like everybody's like, you don't get AFib till you're 55 and you're 23.
Right. So now you have PVCs.
Yes.
Do you have those every day?
I did until about 3 weeks ago. Constant. Probably I was somewhere around like 7,200 to 7,600 depending on the day.
Right. Can you explain that to everybody listening?
Yeah, so premature ventricle contractions, what happens is there's a short loop in one of your ventricles. So the best way that I found to explain it is if you have 3 beats in 5 seconds, you still have 3 beats in that 5 seconds. Just the increment between your first beat and your second beat is shortened because your ventricle fires sooner than it's supposed to. So you still get the same amount of heartbeats. You still get the same heartbeat, essentially. It's just 2 of them are really close together. So it creates a long pause between the second and the third one, but you still maintain.
So it's if the electrical activity of your heart, and just to describe this to maybe people who don't know too much about anatomy, physiology, the heart is stimulated electrically. It kind of stimulates its own self, and it sort of has what's called nodes within the heart, and it tells the actual rhythm, kind of like a metronome, that it's supposed to beat at a certain rhythm for most people, and it has backups of nodes. It's very incredible. And what the electrical stimulants do are cause the heart to contract. And when that does, it pushes the blood around, pushes the oxygen to all your cells, kind of keeps you alive. So with the premature ventricular contractions, he's having his heart rhythm is just going boom, boom, boom. But every once in a while, it's boom, 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 like that, right? Am I?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's what that is. And again, people live with that, but it's uncommon for somebody so young. So you were basically just sitting there and you just discovered that your heart was just beating off the wall, huh?
Yeah, and it's just this one was also weird because I did wear a Holter monitor a whole bunch, and we really got down to the core of it. And my cardiologist told me this time around, he said, the strangest anomaly with me that he's found is I feel every single one of them. So usually people who have PVCs, either they feel them seldomly or they don't feel them at all. And I feel every single one that I get.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, like I said, my bad days were like 72 to 7,600 PVCs a day. But wow. Yeah, they really don't. And I mean, he's like, yeah, it's just, he's like, he's like, they're a nuisance, but you're not at a point yet where it's going to be, I guess it's something like you have to have like 20,000 a day to really for them to cause serious concern, because that'll lead to like cardiomyopathy and stuff like that.
Right.
So really, it's just a nuisance thing. So now I'm on anti-arrhythmia medicine, and that's why I was saying 3 weeks ago is really when it curtailed off, because this stuff has really taken me from like 7,600, and now I'm up to the maximum dose of anti-arrhythmia. We started real low, and now we're up to the max, and I get like 4 to 10 a day now.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll take it all day long.
And so you must feel a lot better since you are feeling them all.
Oh yeah, I feel great now. You know.
Does anything increase them, like stress or anything that?
100% stress.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, even through the medicine today, I cut through a few more times than I usually do, but just because things were, just a bad day, really. Everybody has them. Today was a bad day, but, I got a few more today than I usually do, but nothing like if I wasn't medicated today, I would have been heavy, very heavy palpitations.
Sure. And again, like you were just saying, people live with these all the time. It's just the uncommon part is being young, and you'll live a long life, I'm sure about it. But as long as you take good care of yourself, it's just uncommon for these type of things to start setting in at 23. It's like I tell you, that's what I learned being on the medic. And I used to be in an area that had a lot of convalescence homes and a lot of elderly places. Everyone had AFib. I mean, if you were over 70, you had AFib. And I remember somebody told me one time, well, if you live long enough, you'll get AFib too. And it is what it is. So it's just kind of uncommon. But hey, miracle in medicine, right?
Absolutely.
Joke's on the doctors, Pat. Not going to live that long.
Except for Zach. Zach will never get AFib.
No, he won't. No.
No, we always make the joke. I was like, man, I feel like I'm going to fall over and die. And everybody I know is like, you're going to be 95 just being mean to kids on your lawn.
You know, there is a positive correlation with being, what's a good word for it? Crusty and longitude of life.
Yeah, it's funny how the miserable guys always seem to live forever, isn't it?
Yeah, like the grumpy old men kind of situation.
You just will yourself to stay alive out of pure hatred for oneself. It's no big deal. It's kind of an art form, Pat. I don't like to brag.
I tell you what, my grandfather, he's one of the men that I look up to the most in my life, and he is one of the grumpiest old guys I've ever met, and. So there's a situation. Let me rewind just a little bit. My uncle, his wife left him. It sucked. It was a bad ordeal. But the only reason that she told him that she was leaving a couple years ago was that he was turning into his father. And as soon as she told me that, I looked at him. I said, "You're becoming awesome." Because my grandfather's awesome. He's grumpy. But I don't know, there's something about him that I just find so awesome because he's grumpy. And then you get to that certain age where because you're grumpy, you can say whatever you want and people just go, he's just a grumpy old man. Did you hear what he said? If he was 20 some odd years old and he said that on Twitter, he would be knocked off, Twitter for life.
Oh yeah, my grandfather's a 93 years old, World War II veteran, and he's like a classic old white guy with bolo ties and like Stetson hats and white cowboy boots, and like he looks like a rhinestone cowboy sometimes. And
he sounds awesome.
Dude, he is. This guy is just a ton of fun. He finally got hearing aids after like 40 years of needing hearing aids, so now he can hear what you're saying. And some of the stuff that he says is like, you're 1950, golden. 2019, you're like, bud, you got to make sure you don't say that in public.
Speaking of that, I gotta ask you, Nate, what was Zach like as a kid?
Pretty much the same. I think he had more of a wild hair before the Navy.
He was more wild before the Navy?
Yeah. Like, we got stories those are probably off-air stories though. But no, like, it doesn't matter what you're doing in the morning. You give him a good 3-hour buffer period before you approach him after he wakes up. So like there's a good 3-hour gap between him coming conscious for the day and you approaching him with something that you actually want to have like positive feedback on. Cause usually, he's a slow get up. You know what I mean? Like you don't you don't want to just jump into it first thing in the morning.
You're not a morning person, Zach?
Oh no, not at all. Unless I'm waking up first thing to go fight somebody, I'm pretty much. That's about the only thing I'm good for. That if you need something killed first thing in the morning, that's about what you get out of me.
Okay, all right. So that's one place where we don't have in common because I'm a 4:30er.
Oh, I'll get up. Like if I'm getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go out and hunt, I'm chipper. I'm like the happiest guy. I'll yuck it up with you all day. But if I'm getting up at 7 a.m. to go to class, I'm like miserable.
I'm actually a 4:25er. Because that's exactly the amount of time I need to get up and do my morning routine, get in the car, and drive an hour and a half to go to work.
Oh, that's a terrible commute. I apologize.
Yep.
That's cold.
Spend 3 hours a day in the vehicle trying to get to work 5 days a week to go run some fire academies.
Man, that's a long commute. I don't envy that one. So, Nathan, I have a couple questions here now that we've kind of got some good background on your story here. How would you describe how you are as a parent knowing that you have to keep your stress levels low to maintain your own health?
See, that's a thick question, and I do like it because it makes me have to think about this a little bit. Honestly, I don't parent to subdue stress for myself. I think I just approach it with what I feel is good parenting in general. I know there's going to be stressful ups and downs, you know what I mean? But I don't necessarily approach it to subdue stress in my house. I mean, with my kids anyways, like I feel like discipline's 24/7. Now, when I say that, I don't mean like I leather belt them or anything like that, but you know, they're at such an impressionable age now. My boy's 4, about to be 5, and I got a daughter that's 2, about to be 3. And that's just such an impressionable age that I think stress comes with it. So for me, I think raising good kids and establishing discipline. And, you know, I always talk to them about, did you make the right decision? Is that the decision you should have made? Because I think now is a critical time. And I think, honestly, if I can influence them to be conscious of decisions at this young of an age, it's going to make things less stressful in the future.
How old are they?
They're going to be 3 and 5 here in the next couple months, both of them.
I have a 3.5-year-old, and there's no conversation with them, but that's for a whole other bag of details. I wish that we could talk to him and ask him if he makes good decisions. I remind him all the time, Bryce, you're making a poor choice. This is a poor choice, but it means nothing to him because he doesn't communicate. He's nonverbal. So it's tough. I'm imagining if I had what you have in my household, how would I mitigate the stress of parenthood? Because I'm telling you, they say that parenting is the hardest thing you can ever do. And I definitely don't want to take away from that or from anybody, but parenting an autistic child has got to be even harder. And I don't know too much to say about that, but it is constant stress. It's constant screaming, constant throwing, constant kicking, punching, biting. It's tough. It's very tough. I didn't mean to take it down my own rabbit hole, but
no,
absolutely.
That's the beauty of these conversations, Pat. That just flowed out naturally. Beautiful, beautiful thoughts there. You know, looking at it from two perspectives here, one being that, you know, with Nathan's heart issues in that particular situation, holy cow, you could imagine, man, your heart would be just ablazing. And even still, I mean, to be able to effectively and lovingly raise a nonverbal child, I could not wrap my head around not being able to communicate with words to my child or any of that. To me is an impossibility. Like I don't have the depth of understanding to be able to say, oh, okay, you know what, I could kind of guess what no way. Like, and I wonder often, and even aloud to my wife, I said, man, I want to be a fly on the wall to see how Pat is able to parent, because I feel like if you can have a loving and caring relationship with someone that you cannot communicate with, I should be doing better with my kids that I can communicate with. And that's a part of it for me. I find to be very inspirational, because if you can do it and not be able to communicate, then I should be doing a way better job than I am. I'll tell you that much.
Well, you know, Chris and I are definitely praised a lot for our patience, but we take a look at ourselves, an objective look at parenting, and man, we fail all the time. I had a situation at a Wawa this past week that I'm embarrassed to have been involved with. I was trying to get Bryce in a car seat, and it just was not happening. And the child is stronger, twice as strong as he's probably as strong as a 20-year-old in a 3-year-old's body. And trying to push him into a car seat when he doesn't understand and he's trying to melt down. I mean, it takes everything that you possibly can give. And Chris and I do tag team where we just have to walk away and I just tag and she's in. And sometimes it works, but we have to tag multiple times. And, you know, the patience runs thin. You get angry. You try not to yell. You try not to let the ugly side out of you. But sometimes it comes out because you just can't take it anymore. And unfortunately, other people who are looking in, say in a Wawa parking lot when we were trying to get him in his car seat, saw an ugly side of Pat. And they don't understand what we're going through. They don't understand the trials and tribulations of parenting an autistic nonverbal child. And we're doing the best that we can.
put their 2 cents in on that situation, I'd beat the shit out of a whole Wawa for you, bro. Because that's a place where, guess what? If I'm trying to wrestle my kids into the car seat and they get mad, you can bet your ass I am hot.
Well, no one, when I lose my control, and when I say lose my control, I'm not talking about anything violence. I'm just talking about you just can't take it anymore. It's because we all have our limits. We all, none of us are superhuman. We all have our limits, and we lose kind of control. And we've only said, "Come on, buddy, get in the seat. Come on, buddy. Come on, buddy. Come on, come on." You can only do that so many times with him punching and kicking and headbutting and throwing and arching back and things like that, before you just say, "Just get in the seat." And that's how your tone starts to change. And of course, somebody pulling into the parking lot, seeing that part, hasn't seen the 30 minutes prior of us trying to do it. And of course, everybody's like, "Well, don't care what anybody else thinks." Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. And it's tough to go out in public in a situation like that and risk these type of things. But I tell you what, no one beats themselves up harder than we do when we lose that element of at least vocal control. I'll beat myself up for days if I have to raise my voice at Bryce, but unfortunately, he brings it out of us, and I don't know any way around it. Like I said, people praise us all the time. "Oh, you got so much patience," and of course, the first thing that you think about when somebody goes, "Oh, you two are the greatest parents ever," or you're parenting an autistic child, and the first thought that you have is, "You should have seen me at Wawa." You start beating yourself up again. So anyway, sorry to take y'all down my rabbit hole. I know this is, I know you're saying this is...
We're 3 human beings that also just happen to be fathers, and I really think that, I'm learning, and I know Nate's thinking the same thing. We always use the joke that between my brother and I, we know everything. And then you ask a question I don't know the answer to, I'm like, well, you got to ask my brother. So the portion of it talking about, the people not seeing the 30 attempts prior and beating yourself up later. Oh man, I can tell you 100 different stories about beating yourself up. I remember I was playing with my daughter, and we're spinning around, we're dancing, we're having fun. I pulled her elbow out of socket just playing.
Right.
And mind you, I'm not a spanker. I hardly ever yell. Of the 2 parents, I'm like the least disciplinary. I'm almost leisurely about it. I mostly because I know where I'll go if I get too heated, and so I dislocated her elbow. I gave her a nursemaid's elbow, and we go to the hospital, and they're like, "She's gonna have to have surgeries, and we're gonna have to break her arm." And I'm like, I'm destroyed. Come to find out, it was just a bad picture on the MRI, and her arm went right back into socket by herself. It was just it's something that happens to little kids quite frequently.
Geez.
And so I've got like a 3-hour window where I am like going to jail. I'm the worst parent ever. And then, come to find out she's fine. And then my daughter, being the little angel that she is, reminds me every so often, "Hey, Dad, remember when you dislocated my arm?" And I'm like, thanks. So, and again, I've been fortunate enough to be complimented, like, "Oh man, you raised some really good kids." And I was like, well, if you saw how many gray hairs I got to pull out every day in the shower, you would know that that's not true. So I can definitely commiserate to the point of, get in your seat, do your thing, come on, make a good choice. But I can tell you that sooner or later, I like to call it keeping Doc in the box. Sooner or later, Doc's going to rear his ugly head, and it's going to get loud. And I can tell you that the older I get and the more negative impact that I see it has on my children, the harder that I take that. And I actually was just shown a study that children perceive loud interaction differently than others, and it can actually trigger a fight or flight response in a different child individually. Mm-hmm. So, for example, my daughter Lily and my youngest boy Jacob, you can holler at them and get after them, and it doesn't affect them really. It's not like a life or death situation. They understand that they've done wrong, and they're getting hollered at. my middle son, Lucas, it actually triggers a fight or flight response similar to what people who are experiencing post-traumatic stress are experiencing. Mm-hmm. So we have to take an entirely different approach with him, because if we yell, he immediately goes into survival mode. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that we've abused him or we neglect him or anything. That's not the case. It's just every child is different. But now as we get into more of these advanced psychological studies and you see how you're affecting children, it's just like a whole nother, set of hooks to put in your back about parenting. And like I said, I'm not trying to take anything away from the children. The opposite side of that coin is that when you're trying to be kind and do the right thing for your kids, oftentimes it's still a dagger. You know what I mean?
Right. What's kind of interesting is about, I don't know, about 8 months ago, let's see, Bryce was diagnosed with autism about a year ago. And of course, that's not when he got autism. He's been autistic since he was born. And, we just had to figure that out once we got past the period of him acting like a baby and acting like a normal baby. You get to that certain age where he's supposed to be picking up words, and you're waiting, and then you start seeing other behaviors. And I give you some of those behaviors since we're talking about it. I mean, now's the time, I guess. Starting to not looking in your eyes. So that's a big one. And here's a big thing that, and I wrote a blog post about this one time. When parents start perceiving that their child might be autistic, the amount of pushback that they get from the people that surround them, because the people that surround them don't want to admit that it's a problem, is really unhelpful. Because we were down the rabbit hole of WebMD, down the black hole of WebMD with Bryce, trying to figure out why he wasn't speaking. And that's when we started noticing a lot of the other things that went on with him. Lack of eye contact, not really playing with other children. Like if other children were around and the children were getting excited, he would get excited, but he wasn't really ever playing with them. Tiptoe walking, not playing with toys appropriately. Like if you gave him a box of crayons, he will not color with them. He'll line them up or organize them by color, which I initially, when he was younger, I thought, well, this will be nice to have around because my wife is not organized at all. And he's going to...
Hey, your bookshelves are going to be on point, brother.
Yeah, and that still may be true. It still may be true. Let's see. He would never point to anything, or if we pointed to something, he wouldn't look at what we were pointing to. If he wanted something, he would take our hand and put it on that thing instead of grabbing it himself, almost using our arm as a tool. And anyways, these are the things that we started noticing and that we found out were symptoms of autism. And people all around us are going, oh, he just hasn't talked yet. He'll talk when everybody comes to it at their own period in their life. And yeah, I agree. And I went through all of my own sort of denial with it as well. I didn't want it to be anything. I thought he might be deaf, but we had continued hearing tests with him. And then it was really those extra autistic symptoms that Bryce started displaying that really said to me, yeah, I think this is what it is. And even his pediatrician was like, nah, he doesn't have it. Nah, he doesn't have it. So we said, we really want to be seen by a developmental pediatrician. So they sent us to one up in UVA in Charlottesville. And it took about 6 months for us to even get that appointment with them. We went in, and in 10 minutes, they diagnosed him with ASD, which is Autism Spectrum disorder, and he's a 2 on the scale. And, of course, my first question is, will he always be a 2? Will he be able to, move down and be high functioning? And they said, well, we just don't know. We just don't know. And basically it's a 1, 2, or 3. So 1 is kind of high functioning, 2 needs a lot of assistance, and 3 needs major amount of assistance and might have to not live with the family, that it's so bad. So he's a 2. I don't think it'll ever go to him being a 3. I'd like to think that he'll begin speaking and being able to work with other people and kind of come back down and be a 1. But as a child right now, he just needs so much from mom and dad that they call him a 2 because he's not potty trained and all of those kind of things. And it's not even on the horizon to try to potty train him because there's no communication. It doesn't bother him that his diaper's wet. It's not a thing for him. And so it's definitely been interesting. But yeah, so it's hard when you're trying to tell friends and family, I think he might be autistic, and they're like, no, he's not autistic. He just hasn't started to. Well, no, look at these other symptoms. And especially when you yourself want to be in denial and you don't want it to be true either. But, of course we love him so much. And like I tell everybody, 80% of the time, he's the most loving, affectionate little boy. But so 20% of the time, it's just chaos. And what we discovered about 8 months ago, looking up a lot of kind of alternative healths and a lot of things that they're discovering about autism, because we really don't know much about autism right now. What we do know about autism is that more and more children are being diagnosed at an exponential level. And it's not a situation, I really don't believe it's a situation where it's like, oh, this is being overdiagnosed. And we had friends and family telling us that when he was diagnosed, just don't worry about it. That's getting just as overdiagnosed as ADD. It's like, no, dude, look at this. Look at how we're living. Look at how we're having to live. Look at how this child is behaving. You are saying those things without living in our house with Bryce and not understanding. So, but we started looking into what they think might be causing autism in children and what kind of things that we can do on a non-medicinal, non-therapeutical kind of way. In other words, diet, to try to get him out of to make him less symptomatic. And one of the things we did is we removed gluten from his diet. And at the exact same time, we started giving him a specially made probiotic from a company. I don't have the name of it now, but it's by a company who makes them specifically for autistic children. So it's kind of a tasteless, odorless, he doesn't even know he's drinking it in his milk, but he's getting this probiotic. And within a week, he'd learned 3 words. So we don't know if it was the probiotic or if it was the gluten-free. Now, what we do know is that one day we sent him to school and he had a substitute teacher who did not know he was gluten-free. And she gave him some animal crackers, probably just 2 or 3 animal crackers, because he doesn't eat a lot. But for 3 days, he was in that 20 percentile. Like, he was awful, meltdowns 24 hours a day. There was no consoling this child. And when we got him back to being gluten-free, and so you remove gluten from his diet, it still takes another week for it to get back out of his system. He started becoming like he was before the animal crackers. So then with the probiotic, we've been giving that to him for about 8 months, and he got croup 2 weeks ago, and that somehow turned into bronchitis, and the doctors gave him, guess what? Antibiotics. So we're pumping the child through full of probiotics and antibiotics, and the meltdowns have been insane for the past week. I mean, just insane. And so that kind of leads up to the whole Wawa situation. The night before was Valentine's Day, and I came home from work. I got home about 6 o'clock. I had to go to band practice at 7. And so I was with my wife for a period of just 1 hour. I mean, we did Valentine stuff last week when we went on our trip, and she actually went to a concert that I paid for tonight. But I was home for an hour, and for the entire hour I was home, Bryce was screaming. Just screaming, punching walls, kicking doors, throwing stuff. And it's hard. Man, it's just so hard to recover from that. I don't know how to explain it. When that goes on for days and days, the recovery is difficult, especially when you also are dealing with what we talked about last episode with the PTSD. It's really tough coming back down from that.
Oh, there's no way to quantify that. That's immeasurable, man.
Absolutely. So I have an aunt, and her and my uncle weren't able to have children, so she adopted 4 children. And they elected to choose disabled kids that were put into foster homes.
Wow.
Because usually, you know what I mean, as you can imagine, the rate at which disabled children in foster homes get adopted is like 0. And her youngest child she adopted, they knew when they adopted him that there was something wrong, but they didn't know. And by the time he was 4, his name's Aaron, he was diagnosed with level 3 autism.
Wow.
He's severely autistic, so I applaud all your efforts. I really do, because growing up, I mean, I'm 28. He's only 5 or 6 years younger than me. So I was, he was close enough in age where I was growing up, and he was relatively close in my age group, and I just seen the way that he had to be parented as opposed to the way that I was parented. You know what I mean, as far as the needs and everything. So I truly do applaud, as much as you care about your son, you know what I mean? Like I've seen it firsthand what it's like for those meltdowns over that amount of time. And the unique thing with him was his genetics. He turned out to be huge. So he's 6'6", 325 pounds.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah, I remember Aaron.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, he's a big boy.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but now he's in a home now, because he's so big that when he goes in to do his episodes, his frantic episodes, it takes 3 or 4 grown people to take him down. It's almost unfathomable the amount of strength that I've seen that autistic children have. Right from he was like 11 or 12, it started taking my uncle, my aunt, and one of his sisters to help calm him down when he'd get into one of his moods. And they actually had to put him in a home 3 years ago, right about when he turned 19, because he was at a point now where they'd be driving down the road and he'd grab the wheel. He did it twice and put my Uncle Tim and my cousin Amanda in a ditch on separate occasions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he'd just get so frustrated that he couldn't communicate that he would almost become aggressive and offensive because of that. You know what I mean? Because he couldn't get out what he was trying. You know what I mean? Even though he has no communication, he couldn't get out what he was thinking, what he needed, what he wanted addressed. So you could tell it was just a complete flush of anger, and that's when it would just set him off like a missile.
Well, one of the things that we really noticed after doing the gluten-free thing for a while and then the probiotic thing is that Bryce would have his meltdowns and he would come out of them so much faster. And he would actually exhibit kind of signs of sorrow that he was having the meltdowns. Like, I read this book. It's a really good book for anybody who works with autistic children or any spectrum parents out there. It's called The Reason I Jump. I don't have the author's name, but if you look up The Reason I Jump, you'll find it. It's not a very big book. It's not a thick book. There is a Kindle version of it. I think that's what I used. I might have listened to it on Audible too, and I think it's maybe 2 hours at tops. But basically what it is it's just like this 12 or 13-year-old boy who's autistic, nonverbal, and he's being interviewed by all the kind of questions that spectrum parents have for their kids. And he's able to communicate back with some kind of speech device and write this book. And so they ask questions like, why do you walk on your tiptoes? Why do you have meltdowns? Why do you like to line things up and organize things and things like that? And there's been nothing else that I've read that has been so impactful than The Reason I Jump.
So what did he say? Like, what were some of his responses? Because when you said that there was over a voice recorder, and you can't see it because we don't have our cameras on right now, but Nathan and I just about broke our necks looking at each other.
So basically, the best thing I got out of the book was the guy says, the kid says, he's a man now, I'm sure, but when he wrote the book, he said, it's as if I'm living inside of a robot that I can't control, or that I have my hands on the controls, but it's not working. It's kind of like if you were playing a video game or something, but the controller kind of works sometimes, but not always. And it's not only about movement and things like that, it's also about sensations. So for autistic children, a lot of times they also have sensory disorders as well. So there are children who have sensory disorders and have sensory problems, or, where they need a lot of sensory stimulation or avoidance. then there's autistic, and it's two separate things, but for a lot of autistic children, it overlaps. And so Bryce has a lot of that too. He has a lot of that sensation. But so like the volume of things for them might be insanely louder than we perceive. The smells of things are a lot stronger for autistic children. And so a lot of these sensations sometimes will trigger them, and they can't control themselves because it's as if they're living in a robot that can't control. And so when he has these meltdowns, a lot of times I have to think and kind of put myself in this position that he does not want to be having these meltdowns. Now another factor of it is, what is him being a toddler and what is him being autistic? Because sometimes the line is not so easy to draw. It's not so easy to see. And a lot of times, we'll be telling these stories and about what he's going through or what we're going through, and people would be like, well, that's just him being a 3-year-old. Just so you know, that is really fucking not helpful to autistic parents. And
it's like, how could you say something so impossibly fucking stupid?
Right. And you have no grasp what that means, and you're telling somebody else that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I throw the F. I don't use the F word very often, but that annoys, that is the most terrible thing that you can tell an autistic or a spectrum parent. I wrote a list. I did a post on Facebook about like the top 10 things not to say to spectrum parents, and that was definitely very high on the list. Right next to, I can't be around your child because he stresses me out.
Yeah. Really?
Yes.
You're having a hard day, huh?
Yeah, so I'm sorry the 5 minutes you've dealt with my child has caused you some stress. Anyway, so moving on. So what we did...
I gotta say, so I just gotta get it off my chest, Pat, and I don't mean to cut you off here, but I gotta give you a ton of fucking credit for being the Zen master that you are, because if I were in your shoes, I would have so many murders under my belt right now. Like because we've talked about it, just like you had that issue with a relative that said some unsavory things, and I think my phone got physically hot from me texting you. Like, so I don't know how you do it, brother, because I would lose my mind. I would want to beat the hell out of everybody.
Very often I feel like I am losing my mind, just to be quite honest with you. Sometimes I drive around and I think, this is what it feels like to lose your mind. This is what it feels like. And usually I'll pick up my phone and I'll call you and I'll be like, I think it's finally happening. I think my mind is gone. I think I'm about to go psychotic. I am 100% a human. I'm vulnerable. I feel pain. I feel stress to a high degree. I'm no different than anybody else. It's just that these are the cards that I was dealt. And that it is what it is. Let me tell you this story. So we were out at a Mexican restaurant in our small town one time, and we are very, very cognizant of the people around us whenever we go out to restaurants. It's about a 50-50 shot. I like to say it's 6 bullets in a gun Russian roulette, whether or not Bryce is going to actually sit there and eat and be civil, or if we're going to have to get our food to go, or leave before we can even order. It's about a 50-50 shot. But a lot of times we can get through our meal, but around the 45-minute time frame, Bryce cannot sit any longer. And most of the time, and I actually have an app that tells me about how I spend my day. I don't have my phone on me. How I spend my day, I think it's called Life Cycle. Really cool app. So it tells you how much time you spend on your commute, which for me, it says too long. And then how long you spend at work and all this kind of stuff. So it kind of helps me clock in at work and clock out at work without me even having to think about it, because it just geographically positions you. I know that's a nightmare for some of us paranoid conservatives out there, but but it works. So we spend about the average of 50 minutes when we eat out. And just about any time I eat out or at a restaurant, it just takes from the time you walk in the door to the time you leave. It's almost on the money, 50 minutes every single time. So 45 minutes, Bryce is done. So that leaves about 5 minutes for the check to come and for you to pay the check and all that kind of stuff. So Bryce was really good at this restaurant this one night, but about, I don't know, at about 43, 44 minutes, he starts getting a little rowdy. And so, like I said, we're really cognizant about that. And so I'll usually pick him up and take him outside and let him walk around and burn off some energy and just leave my card on the table for Chris to pay the tab. So Bryce started yelling, and I said, okay, it's time. So I pick him up. I take him outside. About 5-6 minutes later, Chris comes out, and I can tell she is hot. She is hot. So apparently after I picked up Bryce and took him outside, that there was another family, another couple. The father turned to his kid, I guess maybe a 4-year-old kid, and said, you better never act like that in public, ever. And Chris overheard him say that. And she turned around and she told the man, excuse you, my child has special needs, and I can hear what you're saying. So props to her for standing up for us and Bryce and the autism community. It's very often that we don't hear what people say. We just perceive what people are saying when we get up and leave. But I mean, that's just another example of some of the things that we go through. So even when we're cognizant and we're trying to remove him from the situation and trying to make sure everybody else in the world is comfortable via our own discomfort, we still get hammered in public. It's tough.
I would like to offer a tip, not on your parenting or anything like that, but like a restaurant thing.
Yeah.
When I went through the counterintelligence course, one thing they teach us during surveillance is if you're in a restaurant, when you order your meal and you place your order, ask for your check right then. So the reason that they do that is so that way you've already paid, right? And then you can just bolt when you got to bolt.
Right.
So say you go into a coffee shop and you don't pay your tab, and all of a sudden your guy walks out, and now you got to try to catch him, and you got to pay, and there's 4 other people in line, and blah, 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 blah. So that's one thing that my wife and I did for the longest time when both of our 2 oldest were toddlers, because 2 toddlers at a table is usually a good recipe for a fist fight between toddlers.
Yeah.
And so what we would do is that we would place our order and immediately get our check. Like we would place the order and hand them our card, pay up front, tip right then. And then when the kids got out of hand, we would bolt. I'm sure you've probably already thought about it, but I figured maybe if it could get you closer to your 44, 45 minute mark, and then, alleviate some stress, you know what I mean? And that way Bryce is happy, he's comfortable, and he's not having to bounce around your booth, you know what I mean? And make him feel a lot better.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a good point. We have done that in the past. We've done it before. Very often though, just to be honest with you, Chris and I just get takeout and we bring it home because we just don't want to risk it. We don't want to play 6-bullet Russian roulette. We just don't want to do it. Unfortunately, what that means is that we end up becoming reclusive. And I don't know what else to say about that. It sucks, but like I said earlier, it's the cards that we've been dealt, and we kind of have to live with them, kind of have to play them as they go.
Well, it's tough when you get dealt an excellent spades hand, but you're playing hearts.
Right.
It's tough, brother.
Just to cut in, I mean, I just wanted to listen to you talk and stuff. There's just a couple things. So, I mean, I do a lot of outside reading. You know what I mean? I'm kind of on a quest for knowledge at this point in my life. So, I was reading about a study, right? And it's about children and just the way that brain mapping is now, the way that it's advanced. So, children at like the age from 2 to 4 have eerily similar brain activity as schizophrenics. I don't know if you guys knew that.
No, I didn't know that.
And it's kind of like where the stem of their creativity and stuff come from. Like if you think about how creative a 2 to a 4-year-old is,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Their imagination, where it stems from.
Yeah.
So back to Zach, back to your like perception on how some kids receive things differently.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Pat, with your sensory stuff like that, I can only imagine that's amplified a ton with autism being involved. You know what I mean? So there was that. But then for you specifically, Pat, I was also reading this thing. I don't know if you guys ever get into a YouTube hole.
Oh yeah.
I kind of do that sometimes when I'm reading like scientific journals and stuff like that. So I came across this other one, and it had to do with autism, Asperger's, stuff like that. And there's been a group. I can't remember the group, Pat. You should definitely check it out though. But there's this study that was conducted that shows, as far as human progression goes and evolution, that there's a lot of belief now with the more frequency of autism being prevalent in society, that really what's going on is the human genome's working on evolution, and the autistic mindset and the Asperger's mindset is really just like a computer that's miscoded slightly from being a supercomputer. So really the perception is like your son's brain and other kids with autism's brain was just a couple strokes away from being genius. Like it was just, you know what I mean? Like if there was a way that you can bust in and change the code, it would just take a slight shift to genius, to pure genius, as far as communication, math, anything you can think of. Like it's just one step away from that. And unfortunately that miscode busts into the other things, like communication, sensory stuff like that. So,
well, you do see that in a lot of autistic children. They become savants in like one particular topic.
Absolutely.
And like whatever interests them, they just become super interested. Like, I can't remember who was telling me, but somebody had a autistic relative, and they told me that their brother or whoever it is got obsessed with vacuum cleaners, and they could tell him how to fix a vacuum cleaner, all the different parts of vacuum cleaners and all the vacuum cleaners that are sold and all the different brands. So, and then I know another guy who has an autistic son, and his thing was presidents. He could tell you that he could list all the presidents in a row, when they were elected, who their wives were, all that kind of stuff. So some of that's more practical than others. You just kind of hope that your kid gets really interested in something cool and not like Dustbusters. Well, I got to say, I was actually talking back and forth with an old friend of ours, Zach, Tim Stewart.
Oh, hey, how's Tim doing?
Well, it sounds like he's doing pretty good. He listened to our last podcast. He really enjoyed it. And so I want to give him a quick shout out. And I like to bring things kind of around in a loop, because basically we talked a lot. Well, we talked a lot about my child and autism, and then we talked a little bit about Nate's heart problems and discovering those, and what he has to deal with that. So Tim said to me, and this is based on our last podcast, he wanted to make us think about this quote. He said, "Take a look at the worst moments in your life and ask, how is this the best thing that's ever happened to me?" So I'd like to do a round robin and see if we can come up with the worst moments in our life and talk and try to come up with ways that these were the best things to ever happen to us, so we can really get that animal mind kind of concept out of this podcast.
Now, I'm going to ask this because I assume that you've been preparing your response.
Not at all.
I'm going to go ahead and retract that statement. How much time do we get to prepare?
Well, I can go first.
I can literally go first off the cuff right now.
Send her, Nate. Send her.
Okay. So, I kind of hinted earlier that I used to drink more than everybody else. So, I made some bad decisions in my life based on choosing to have more of a social life than a practical one. And so when I was in college, one of the things that led me to stop going was I got a DWI when I was 19.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that really puts a damper on communication, travel, stuff like that. People usually shut it down when you're that young and you're going through legal issues like that. I used to do a lot of binge drinking, send it 4 or 5 days right in a row. And really at the time I was just being social, you know what I mean? Just going out with your friends and meeting people and stuff like that. But it got to the point where I was drinking way too much when I was drinking. I was getting to the point of blackouts. I was making bad decisions. So really, honestly, the person that I was when I would get real into it was not the person that I am and the person that I knew I could be. So really, one of the blessings for me in disguise was actually my heart issue. If I would have never went down that road, I probably would have never cold turkey quit drinking. I got better as I got older, but there was times where I'd just be like, I'm just going to go for it tonight. Tonight, I am going to do it big. And the fact that I had my heart issues actually removed me completely from that scene and making those decisions and constantly choosing to try to be social. Because I always used to use, social environments as a reason to drink as opposed to drinking socially, as you hear people say it all the time. So the fact that I actually went through and have these heart issues and had these heart issues, I've already committed to myself that I won't ever drink again. And it's one of those things where I'm committed to myself truly, so I know that I'll stick with it. Where some people, like, they try to quit smoking or something and they're not fully invested, so it never really works. Well, this is one of those things where I'm fully invested. So that's kind of my terrible thing that happened to me that actually was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
So I'm thinking now, you mentioned having some sense of anxiety, that kind of leads you down the medical website black hole. Maybe some of that anxiety about your life is a blessing too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. There is such thing as a kind of a healthy fear. And we talk about this in the fire department, I think the public wants to paint us and we want them to paint us as, brave and courageous and running into burning buildings without fear. But I don't want to ever go into a burning structure with somebody who's not a little bit afraid, because they're absolutely insane at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want somebody just afraid enough to be safe. So
some of your best instinctual reactions to situations are based out of fear. You know what I mean? If you take the conscious or the subconscious of fear out when you're making decisions, I mean, sometimes you'd be willing to push yourself past, logical decision.
Right. And I think I think all negative emotions do have their place. Fear, sadness, things like that, they do have their place because they try to drive us away from those things. Does that make sense? So
I can agree with that. I found that fear and anger and self-loathing were some of the catalysts that turned me in from a drug-addicted teenager and a absolute waste of space to a useful human being that could be trained and was willing to learn and be a useful member of society. But I think that you have to be able to have the wherewithal to see those negative emotions as, okay, this is my emotional and biological response to me not living right. Mm-hmm. Whether you're whatever your circumstances, and you, instead of taking those emotions and saying, well, everybody else this is the problem and I didn't have anything to do with this. Instead of that, you should go, okay, my body is telling me I am doing wrong. This is not natural. This isn't right. I must change.
Right. So Zach, what about your worst moments and how did they become the best thing that ever happened to you?
Oh, it's just like so many worst moments, Pat.
So many lessons in one lifetime.
I'm going to go with the most recent one because it's the one that's most fresh in my head. The most recent one was in October. It was late September. Actually, it was opening weekend of bow season here in New York State. I was working like a dog, not sleeping, and I ended up going on an 8-day stretch where I didn't sleep. And I went on a backpacking trip. I backpack bow hunted, didn't see a deer, come out of the woods with 75 pounds on my back after a few miles and immediately went to the bar, had a few beers with my dad, and then decided to go jump in my tree stand. And obviously I wasn't drunk hunting. That's not what I'm saying, but just, spent the day with my dad watching football, had a beer or two, and then jumped in my tree stand. Deer comes out. I make a bad shot. Now, anybody that knows anything about me knows that I like deer more than I like people. I was sick over it. I looked for this deer for 2 straight days on my hands and knees in the pouring rain, trying to find a deer that wasn't there. So you know what? I'm like, whatever. My PTSD is through the roof. My work stress is almost impossible. I'm having issues sleeping, eating. I've got rashes and boils all over my body. I'm bleeding and pussing, and my hair's falling out. And I'm just dying. I'm literally just rotting from the inside out. And so a couple days goes by and I go bow hunting again. And it's a beautiful, crisp morning. I get in my stand and I see deer all morning. A doe comes out, beautiful 30-yard shot. And she jumps the string. And I didn't bury my pin. And I wound another one. And now all of a sudden I'm tracking this deer and it's starting to come into my brain that
Bless
I am
you.
not, thank you. Sorry, I am not going to find this deer. And at this point, all of my life's issues on top of not being able to find the second deer in 2 days are hitting me like a Mack truck. And now all of a sudden I'm trying to blood trail a deer on my hands and knees and I'm crying and I'm hyperventilating and I can't breathe and I'm scared and I don't know where I am. Now, I had been at a place that I've been hunting since I was 14 years old, and I could see my truck. And I couldn't get to my truck. I had to call my father and ask him to come take over for me because I didn't know what I couldn't do it. I couldn't hardly even talk. Now, I don't know how many fingers you can count on, Nathan, where you've ever seen me cry sober. Zero times, and he's known me since we were 5. My wife has seen me cry sober 2 times. Once was when I watched the movie Marley and Me, and the second time was when I called her on the phone and I couldn't hardly even breathe or talk, and I flat out had a nervous breakdown. For lack of a better term, I was just a heap. And that actually led me to a doctor through the VA, Dr. Bordenero. That lady's a saint. And I went into her office and I looked like smashed ass. And she goes, "Well, what's going on?" And I said, "I'm just having a hard time at work and I can't get anything done." She looks at me and goes, "Oh no, honey, you work?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "No, honey, you're going to die." She said, you're done. You need to get healthy and you need to take your time to get healthy. And she said, and that starts right now. You will not return to work until I say you go back. And so she took me out of work and I was scared shitless. I have worked every day of my life since I was 14 years old. I've had a job, at least on and off, or I've tried to work, doing something, trying to, pay my friggin' taxes, right? Mm-hmm. And for the first time in my life, I was unemployed. I had no income. I had a mortgage, truck payments, car payments, medical insurance, all this stuff, credit cards, blah, blah, blah. No money, no job, nothing. But then all of a sudden I woke up and I felt really good. And time went by and I ended up being medically retired, at least in the interim until I'm healthy enough to go back to work. And all of a sudden my hair stopped falling out and my blisters went away and I can sleep and I can eat a meal and I can sit in a chair without moving. All of a sudden I'm not having panic attacks 5 or 6 times a day. I haven't had a panic attack in weeks. And the one thing that I was always the most afraid of is not being a productive member of society. And when it was taken from me, it actually showed me that I wasn't even a functioning member of society. I was a high functioning, nervous wreck. And so it took seeing that I was unhealthy and having to embrace that I was unwell to actually get well. And now I'm to the point, it's been, I'm 2 years into the process where I'm finally getting to be like a healthy, normal person. And people are like, "Hey man, it's really cool to see you happy." So that part of it, having a nervous breakdown in the middle of the woods and crying like a baby was one of the worst moments of my life. And then it turned into being mentally healthy, physically healthy, emotionally and spiritually healthy, and pursuing dreams, going to college, being a better father, being a better husband, better friend. Right. And so that for me would probably be what it'd be, Pat.
He can eat now, but he still can't gain any weight. Don't let him fool you.
You're a bastard. That's it.
So it is interesting while you're telling me about that, and I was thinking about time frames of, you and I meeting and becoming really good friends in person, and you leaving me high and dry and going back up to New York. Yeah. and
just driving the bus on that one, Pat.
Yeah. And going for a couple years and us not talking, and it's just funny how time works out. And then, immediately we find a common thread and we're back at it. like we didn't miss any time. So it's just interesting the way that I guess God puts things together. And
I agree with that, Pat. And I would tell you that I think more often than not that people find themselves to think that they're human beings that are living a spiritual existence. And I disagree. I think that we're spiritual beings that live a human existence.
Yeah.
And I find oftentimes, especially in cases like ours, that, we're just realizing in this life that we're walking together and that we should be. But I don't think that precludes us in any way from having had walked together in another life. Mm-hmm. And I wonder oftentimes what that other life was and what our roles were, because I met Nathan at random. Our parents got together at random, and all of a sudden you click with a person on a visceral level. I meet you at a play at Against Sports in Virginia Beach, and you click at a visceral level in a way that it's like you've been there every day of somebody's life, and it makes me wonder genuinely, and it makes me beyond any sort of mortal curiosity, what were we before? And we must have walked in another life, and we're just so fortunate to have bumped into each other again, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's almost as if because it was very brief for you and I. I don't know how many months we hung out, but I would say within it was probably about 6 months, and we became best friends at that time. And you had to leave, and I was pretty emotional about that, to be very honest with you.
I didn't take it so well myself.
Yeah. So there's only 3 times a man is allowed to cry. So Marley and me isn't in there. Do you know what the 3 times are?
No, go ahead.
There's only 3 times. It's when their daughter gets married, so you're allowed to cry when she gets married, when Lily gets married. When they've been shot, you're allowed to cry. And when you stand on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Those are the 3 times a man is allowed to cry.
I like that. Very good.
Is there any substitutions for that? Like, can I trade one out, or is that it's concrete?
What do you want to trade out? Can't be Marley and me.
I think it's the Grand Canyon. See, I don't know if I could take the Grand Canyon with a tear. You know what I mean? Like, I'm standing on the edge of a cliff. I don't know if I should be crying right now.
So I'm going to be very honest with you.
Breakdown. Oh, I love
it. That was a Ron Swanson. Are you familiar?
I love Parks and Rec, man. I knew as soon as you were saying, I know right.
Oh no, I'm out of the loop. Then I apologize, everybody.
So that was a Ron Swanson, and so I think 2 or 3 years ago, Chris and I actually went and visited 5 parks out in Utah and Nevada and all that area. We went to the Grand Canyon, and I totally forgot that he had said that. But I tell you what, when I walked to the edge of the Grand Canyon, I cried like a little baby.
Oh, it's amazing, man.
I gotta go.
There's some, and I was thinking about this when I was hiking last week. There's something about feeling small that's very therapeutic. So when you stand on a cliff, or when you're looking out over expansive land, oceans, mountains, or something like that, the Grand Canyon, and you just realize how big the world is and how small and insignificant that you are, all of your problems also become miniature. And there's something very therapeutic about figuring out that you're small, because when you're in every single day, just waking up at 4:30 in the morning like me, and then going to bed at 9:15, and just day in and day out, work, come home, watch TV, put the kid to sleep, work, go home, watch TV, put the kid to sleep, that living that kind of lifestyle. When you actually go out and do these things, your problems just seem so much smaller when you're standing there looking at something big in nature.
I agree with that 100%.
Absolutely. It's funny that you say that, because I just remembered when I'm driving a lot, I get real deep in thought, and like I always try to take myself in my truck on the road, and then I like to compare that to the things around me, trees, stuff like that, and how we as people view things like skyscrapers as being so big. But if you take a step up a couple miles, how big are we? And then you take another step up and you get to where satellites orbit the Earth, and you look down, like, really, how big are you? You know what I mean? Like, how much impact do you have on the area around you when you're there? Mm-hmm. So it has that therapeutic thing that you're talking about. And The other thing it made me think of is, I don't know if Zach, I don't know if you remember, but for me and him, we're deep thinkers. We always have been. And I forget who it was, but there was a girl when we were probably 16, 17 who looked at me and him in a situation. I don't even remember what the situation was, but she's verbatim. Her words were, "You guys think way too hard about stuff." And I don't remember who it was, but it just made me think about the topic that we're talking about. And sometimes I do get lost in my thought about, how small we really are, like you're saying, like when you really start to think about what we are.
Yeah. And that's not to say that we can't have an impact on the world, because then you also have that kind of dropping a rock in a lake kind of situation too, where it's the little things that we do that make big results. So I don't want
to always kill butterflies.
Yeah. The whole butterfly effect. I believe, pretty strongly in that, but there's times that when we need to kind of come out of our own heads and realize that our problems might not be as significant as we think they might be. I don't know. It's just something I thought about when I was out on the trail, getting miserably lost. And I was 13 miles in and delirious and hearing voices on the trail last week.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I portrayed, I guess it's exactly what you just touched on. Not that we don't have an impact, but sometimes it's okay to take a step out of your critical thought and to just be and take in what's around you. You know what I mean? Like, instead of thinking constantly, just be in the moment and don't think for a minute. Look around.
Absolutely. And that's what Zach and I have kind of talked about a lot. And I think that this podcast is a lot about that, using some kind of primal activity, because we're not meant to be sitting in front of screens. We're not meant to be sitting with phones in our hands all the time. We're really not even meant to be sitting around listening to podcasts for 24 hours a day. I mean, there's a lot of useful tools in that, a lot of useful information, hopefully in this podcast. But when we get down to our primal nature, I think we're able to defrag. You remember that, like on PCs?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You had to 100%. Defrag the hard drive to kind of get things back in perspective. And I think there's a lot to primal activities, camping, hunting, getting out there in the woods, even, archery and shooting, and anything that forces your mind to shut down and kind of take care of itself. I think that's necessary. So, my answer to Tim's question, take a look at the worst moments, and I want to replace worst with hardest, because the moment I want to talk about is not definitely a worst. But it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And of course it's Bryce, of course. It's the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And it's ongoing every single day. And just when you think you're making headway, it all falls apart every single day. But I wear a bracelet on my hand that has Bryce's name printed on it. And the reason I wear that is just to remind me how much I love this child and how much he loves me as well. And, everything that I do, I have that bracelet on to remind me that everything I do in my life is for him. So every time I go to work, I'm doing it for him. Every time I do a push-up, I'm doing it for him. When I'm out there, like we just said, hiking a trail or doing something primal, trying to defrag my brain. I'm trying to get the stress level down so that I can handle Bryce better, that I can be a better parent. And so that's why I guess he's the best thing to ever happen to me, and also the hardest, to be quite frank.
I think about it this way, Pat, and I don't know that there's a person more uniquely qualified to better parent an autistic child. I think that, I find it hard to believe that there are people that could be better suited for it than you are. And it's one of those things where, like, if you're doing your first round draft pick of a guy that you want to be able to handle a challenging child who do you pick? And it's like, well, geez, Pat's like your guy, man. This is the guy that knows more about the inner workings of oneself than the average mortal could ever attain. And I just think oftentimes, like, I think about how you are challenged, and I think about how your days are difficult at times. But I also think, I'm like, damn, like, Bryce lucked out. Like, you're going to fall into two great parents like Pat and Chris. It's like, man, I mean, talk about getting a tough hand. Like, Bryce got handed, like, royal flush full of parents, bro. And I mean, there are a lot of kids out there that would never get the chance, and you and Chris break your necks to give this kid an amazing life. And it's like, you know, hardest moment, 100%. But I'll tell you what, that kid lives an infinitesimally better life, if not for any other reason, because his parents are truly uniquely qualified and spectacular people. You know, take that for what it's worth.
You know, I thank you for the compliment, and I got to add to that I appreciate that compliment on several different levels, but I walk in the shadow of my wife. Like, she eclipses the patience and the ability and the mindset and the mental strength and things that I'm trying to develop and I'm trying to learn from other people. But man, she is a rock. And yeah, that's all I got.
That was beautiful, man. That was real beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, gentlemen, thank you for joining episode 2. I hope our listeners maybe gain some perspective from this, from a couple different angles. And hopefully it wasn't too over dramatic, and hopefully they'll join us again for episode 3. We're going to, continue to raise the bar each podcast and try to make this show better and better, and bring more people on and get more perspectives on the things that we're talking about, this mental strength, this animal mindset, this masculinity, manliness, and just, be everyday Joes with one another, be vulnerable, and hopefully men can walk away and women too, and learn some things, and hopefully we all can be better people in the end. But absolutely. I thank you guys for joining.
Hey, I just wanted to give a shout out to, before I forget, Pat, to our super fan. She's reached out to our, us being co-host and you being the creator of our wonderful podcast. So just want to say thanks to our number one super fan, and hi, Mom.
Hi, Tone.
Oh, that's awesome.
Pat, one question.
Yes.
When are you going to go like Stitcher official or iTunes official?
Oh, we're on iTunes now.
Okay. So I just got to download iTunes.
Yeah, well, Nathan was asking earlier, Pat, about Stitcher, and I said, you know what? I don't know. That's the guy to ask. Pat's the technological guru.
No, we can get on Stitcher. It's not a problem. I just have to jump through the hoops to do it. That and Spotify, and I just have to jump through the hoops. Most podcasts, I'm just going to throw a number out there. 80% of people listening to podcasts are on the iTunes, so that was definitely the first hoop that I wanted to jump through, and then also just start getting us on YouTube as well. So while I'm on it, we do have a website, everybody. Of course, it's animalmindpodcast.com. We're all over social media now, so we're on the Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and YouTube. So please follow us and talk to us. And if you have any things that you want us to talk about, or if you even want to be on the show, reach out. You think you got something to say, something special, we want to talk to uncommon men doing uncommon things. We also want to talk to the everyday Joes doing uncommon things. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to episode 2. I hope you have a wonderful week. See you guys later.
See ya.
Later.